Hi everyone, welcome to Chapter 10, Designing Adaptive Organizations. Okay, organizing. What this chapter is really about is how a company is organized in terms of the structure of reporting structures, who reports to who, and where the functional areas are. Where does marketing go? Where does a division go? Where does finance go? And does the finance guy report to the marketing guy, or does the marketing guy report to the finance guy, or do both of them report to the president? All of that type of thing. So how is a company organized? And granted, most of the time when you go into a company, they're going to have a unique structure, something a little different from every other company, because it's not a universal way of doing things. It's not a universal way of doing things. Many companies do things, most, if not all, do things a little bit differently. But there's some basic rules and some general approaches. So everything we go through is very idealized. Everything we're going through today is going to be idealized. But the companies you eventually go to work for will have something similar to something you see here today. So here's a sample organizational chart. You have the president at the top, then you have the vice president, director of human resources, various vice presidents, and the director of marketing, all reporting directly to the president. And then you have the people reporting. So let's go to the vice president of accounting. You have 3 people reporting to him. Then you go down to the chief accountant, and you have 2 people reporting to him. And then this would just trickle down. These, in large organizations, there could be several thousand people in a chart like this. A proper chart will have every single employee somewhere on the chart. And there's a lot of rules and a lot of best practices involved with setting up a company like this. And we're going to go look at different versions of this. And we're going to go through all those rules here in the next few minutes. So the basic organizing concepts, if you have work specialization, is the degree to which organizational tasks are subdivided into individual jobs. This is the divisional labor. So this just basically means that if you're an accountant, you're doing accounting. And one day you don't come in and they ask you to go on the assembly line and put lug nuts on wheels. So you have your specific job and you do your specific job. Chain of command is the authority line that goes through all the employees. So who is your boss? Who is your boss's boss? Who is your boss's boss's boss? And so forth. And eventually everybody works their way up to the very top person. And you can work your way from the top person all the way down to every employee. Now that seems like common sense, but it actually took us a little while to get there in terms of corporate organization. We had a lot of dead-end chains of command. And in poorly designed companies, you'll still see this, where you may see that your boss's boss's boss has no boss. And that's a sign of very poor design. And typically those are the types of divisions that are just eliminated when there's a restructuring. So then we get to authority, responsibility, and delegation. Authority is vested in organizational positions, not people. So whatever authority you have is not based on your personality or who you are. It's your position title. So it doesn't matter who the person is. It is the title. So if you have the title of Vice President of Finance, you get the authority with the Vice President of Finance. Now, I'll use myself as an example. So if Kevin Hill is the Vice President of Finance and I have all of these people reporting to Kevin Hill, if Kevin Hill gets shifted to a new job, all of those people that were reporting to me don't follow me. They still report to the Vice President of Finance, whoever that new person may be. So as people move around, the job titles stay in line and the authority that comes with those job titles stays the same. Okay, authority flows down the vertical hierarchy. We've already discussed that. Authority is accepted by subordinates. So this is kind of the whole thing that holds a company together, is that you accept your role as an employee and that your boss gets to tell you what to do and his boss gets to tell him what to do or her what to do. And that is the basic structure of a company that makes it work. A military works the same way. As soon as people stop recognizing that structure and it is not accepted, the whole thing falls apart. It's also a quick way, if you are not accepting the authority of your superiors, you won't have a job for very long. All right, responsibility is basically you have to perform the job you're given. Accountability is the mechanism through which authority and responsibility are aligned. So are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? That's how you're held accountable. If you're not, you're going to probably get fired or reprimanded. Delegation is the process that managers use to tell the people below them what to do. Line and staff authority. Line departments perform primary business tasks. So this is something you don't always hear people refer to line departments when you're in the workplace, and you might hear you might hear divisional a lot. But so, for example, if you work in the sales department, everybody in your department ultimately works towards sales. Same with production. So you'll often hear those called line departments or divisional departments. Staff departments, they support the line departments. So for sales, marketing might report to sales or sales might report to marketing, however your company's set up. But these are different departments that support the line departments. We've already talked about these. The number of employees reporting to a supervisor. Now, this is a really fascinating topic to me. Typically in the workplace, this is referred to as direct reports. Okay, that sounds like a good quiz question. Direct reports. The number of employees reporting to a supervisor. So what is the magic number? And it's a little different all the way around, because I've seen situations where you might have a rule within a company that nobody is more than 4 or 5 direct reports. So that means you're only managing 4 or 5 people. I've been in other situations where I personally have had over 100 direct reports. That was not good. That was, fortunately, 90% of them were very self-sufficient and didn't really need me. Only about 10% or 10 people needed me. And even that, to actively manage 10 people was a lot of work. So you want to make sure to set up that magic number of how many direct reports does someone have. The work has to be stable and routine. Every day can't be working till midnight. You can't be, I've been through periods where I go to work all day, work on the phone on the way home, and then talk on the phone and have phone calls until I go to bed at night and get up and do it again. That's not stable. That's too much. Subordinates perform similar work. So when you have people reporting, a group of people reporting to one person, you don't want that person, the supervisor, dealing with completely different worlds. So somebody is an engineer and a salesperson reporting to the same person. It's too diverse, and it makes the job too difficult, the management job too difficult. You want to make sure the subordinates are in one location. This is idealized. Quite often, people who are reporting to are going to be in various locations. This is very difficult too, especially with larger companies, for that to work. Highly trained require a little direction. Of course, that has a lot to do with things. If people are highly trained, you can have a lot more direct reports. Rules and procedures are defined. If everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing, you can have more direct reports. Few planning, non-supervisory activities. So how much do you have to do as a manager other than just control the people reporting to you? So this is something people often don't think about. If I am managing, say, 5 direct reports, do I have to manage? Is that all I have to do, is make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do? Or do I have to make sure those 5 are doing what they're supposed to do, plus I have to generate actual work in addition to that? And that's, of course, fine, but you want to make sure that the workload isn't too great or too little. Quite often, people will be in a position where they're managing 5 very competent people and have no additional work, and they may only have a few hours of work a week. In other situations, you may have to be very active and produce a lot of work yourself, plus supervise 5 people that don't know what they're doing, and you may be working 80 hours a week. And then the manager's preference. Some people like to have a lot of direct reports, and others like to have very few. And as long as they're being productive, oftentimes managers will work their way over time into what their preference is. Okay. Tall structure, lots of levels, and flat structure. And this is picture the grid. So from the president all the way down to the bottom, you'd have a lot of levels. And flat structure means you have very few levels, and you lose a lot of the hierarchy in that. So you might only be a couple levels away from the president in a flat structure. Okay, so let's actually get into the pictures here and see what we're talking about. So here's an older, tall structure. So you have the president, and then you can see how everybody falls in under the president. And then a newer, flatter structure is the president, and then lots of specialists underneath. Now, this new flat structure is very popular right now amongst new companies. I think of Google. Google had a very new idea on how to organize a company, and they went with this flat structure. However, they realized that the people who've set up companies for centuries knew what they were doing, and Google has slowly morphed into a tall structure. Most companies will eventually work towards a tall structure. Newer companies always say they want everything flat. Everybody has a very specific role. The president is accessible. That's always a nice way to think, but it's not efficient. People have too many direct reports. If you look at that flat structure, how many direct reports the president has? 19. That's a lot for one person. That is too much for one person. When you look at the tall structure, the president has 4. Nobody in the tall structure has, the one vice president has 15, which is probably a little much. But you can see the work is spread out. So once again, flat structures, nice idea. They tend to morph into tall structures just because of workload over time. Centralization and decentralization. Centralization, decision authority is located at the top of the organization, so everything is top down. So the president and the executive team, usually made up of the vice presidents, make all the decisions. Decentralization, and that is the decision making can be pushed further down the line. So managers that are maybe 4 steps away from the president still have decision making authority. And once again, it all depends on how big your company is and what's the best fit. For example, if you're making automobiles, you really want centralized decision making because you don't want somebody 5 levels down once the car has already been designed, making design decisions on the fly near the assembly line, saying, oh, we don't need, let's use these other wheels instead, and this body panel will work better here instead of this one, or whatever it may be. You can't have that in that particular setup. You need to have a very specific hierarchy, and the decisions come from the top. However, other companies, like maybe a marketing company, need to be more nimble, where you can have a manager out in the field working with a client, and the client rejects a marketing plan, and that manager needs the authority to make changes on the fly and have them count, meaning he has the authority to make those changes to make the sale. So it all depends on the company. There's 5 approaches to structural design, and we'll go through them in these next couple of slides. You have your vertical functional. So this means that at the top you have your president, and then you have these divisions underneath, the accounting, manufacturing, human resources. This is when you have really one product that you're selling. So this is how you would have a university set up. We don't manufacture anything, but you'll have the president, and under the president will typically be, in a university setting, you'll have student life, academics, athletics, finance, sometimes human resources reports to finance, and so forth. And you have these and plant operations, because everything is geared towards the one product that a university sells. However, when you get into multiple products, you have to get a little more creative. So that's when you end up with a divisional. So you have Division 1 and Division 2. So in this case, maybe you have 2 very different products. I think of Polaris. They make side-by-side off-road vehicles, and they make jet skis. And I believe they may even make snowmobiles. And so you have product divisions. So you would have a completely separate set of human resources, manufacturing, accounting people for each division. Now you could, in that particular case, merge those together, but a lot of companies choose to divide, where the divisional comes from, divide their company into multiple spots. Yamaha might be another example. Yamaha, you can buy a motorcycle or a keyboard. Well, there's not a lot of crossover there. So that's where you get the divisional. Matrix. This is the one that I really enjoy. Matrix is, you have the product division, and you have the human resources department. So the human resources department actually services, you could see on each node, both divisions, and manufacturing both divisions. And so Matrix is growing very popular because it's efficient, people understand it, and it allows for growth because you could just start stacking divisions down below and still maintain a lot of organization. Okay, team-based, so you have somebody at the top and then the teams report directly to that person. This was something that was very popular in the late 90s, early 2000s. In large part, it's gone away because it doesn't work very well. That sounds like a quiz question as well. The team-based have failed in large part because of lack of supervision is really the teams, many of you have worked in teams in academics. You work on a team project. How does it always work? Well, one person does all the work, or maybe two people, and a couple people get the free ride, either because they're lazy or they're just not as good at their job. And so this really promotes the free rider. And so if we're looking at this red table over here, I think this is purple. So purple and this light yellow say they do all the work. Well, this dark green and orangish color here, these guys aren't needed. There's very few scenarios where all four are of equal ability and are equally productive. And so in this case, these two aren't useful. Well, over time, you figure that out and you let them go. And then you have a two-person team. Well, now you're at that point, you're starting to work your way back towards one of these other models, the divisional model. And then you say, well, this guy's really good at the accounting and the numbers. This guy's good at the creative and marketing. So why don't we have a marketing and a operations department here? And then you end up with a new, with a structure that looks much like the other one. So the team-based, it's a nice idea. And maybe for very small companies when they're just starting out and everyone's really motivated. But for the most part, this whole idea has not worked out. Okay, virtual network. This is where you have a central hub, and then you have the designer, manufacturer, human resource agency, marketer, and those can be anything. And so everybody's working through a central hub. Once again, this is a nice idea, has not worked out all that well. It's very good for small startups, technology startups. This has worked well. But as soon as there's any level of success, they have to move to a more traditional structure. Okay, functional and divisional. So this is where you group people based on their output, and that's the divisional. And geographic or customer-based decisions, this is where you group activities where people are grouped by location, where the group is, or by the customer. And we'll see some examples of this. So a functional structure, you have your R&D, finance, manufacturing, marketing, everyone reporting to the president. And then you have your divisional structure. Once again, we've already talked about this, where you have each of your divisions and they have all their own departments within them. When you get into the geographic, which we mentioned 2 slides ago, this is you might do this for food service. Amazon does a lot of this actually as well, because quick shipping is so important to a company like Amazon that they need to be really close to where their hubs, their distribution places need to be pretty close to the final user. So they divide the country up into geographically and have warehouses geographically. What I always find ironic about Amazon is when they first started out and they were just selling books in the mid-90s, one of their big advertising campaigns was we can keep our prices down because we don't have any warehouses, meaning Amazon just facilitated the transfer of books from the publisher to the end user. So Amazon would not touch the books. They would just contact the Macmillan and Company or McGraw-Hill or a publisher and have the publisher send you the book to your house. And so Amazon never touched it. And that was their claim to fame, is we have no warehouses. And the irony, of course, is now they have the biggest warehouse system in the country. They've really gone the other direction with it. But very successfully, of course. You could argue they're the most successful company in the world right now. And so they divide things up by location. And food companies will do this as well, simply because food goes bad. And so you don't want it to go a long distance if you can help it. So you might divide things up by location. So matrix and team approach, these combine functional. We've already talked about the matrix and team as far as this goes. Okay. So here's the thing with matrix, the dual authority structure. So these are employees. Each node is an employee, and they have two bosses. So we'll take this guy here where my cursor is. He reports to the vice president of engineering and to the product manager. So that's something that you have to be aware of with the matrix, having two bosses. Now, one of the things with the two bosses is, and this is very common. I have a very good friend working in a matrix structure right now, and he has two bosses. And what typically these two people, the vice president of engineering and applications and the product manager, work very closely together all the time. So these people, it tends not to be a problem. And what he is doing for each of these two bosses is tends to be very different. And so because of that, it usually isn't a problem to keep things separate. And to say, well, the instruction from each of the two bosses doesn't conflict. So one boss isn't telling you one thing and another boss another thing. That he's told me it rarely ever happens. And what's very interesting too is he works for a very large healthcare health equipment manufacturer. You know, they make stuff that goes into hospitals. And he said quite often these two people, say the vice president of, we'll use this one, vice president of manufacturing and the product manager of product A, his two bosses will be the same person. He said that is not uncommon at all. Or there's teams, a two-person team. So this vice president of manufacturing and the product manager A do a lot of work together. So it tends to work. Okay. A global matrix structure. So this is where you have, at one level, you have all the different countries or areas, regions, and then you have the different major divisions over here. And then each node is a subsidiary manager. Also very common for international companies. Virtual network approach, we talked about this a little bit, extends the idea of horizontal coordination. Basically, it means that the firm subcontracts most of its major functions to separate companies. So this is a company that will subcontract a lot of things. So you can subcontract HR, you could subcontract marketing, you could subcontract delivery, you could subcontract production. I actually ran a company when I was in my 20s where there was a group of us that all we did was organize subcontractors. So we had a product, we designed the product. We were really research and design and the hub, but we had somebody else make it. We had somebody ship it, somebody make it, somebody ship it, somebody received it. The company that received it then ended up selling it, and they did their own marketing. So all we really did is coordinate everything. We didn't have enough employees to have an HR department. There was only a couple of us, but yet there could be millions of units of a product involved. It's just a matter of facilitation. Now, at some point, people realize if you do this, you don't often hear about this, and we struggled with this, is were we really needed once the product was developed? We came up with the idea, we invented the product, and if all of these companies just started to work with each other, did they really need us as the original inventor who took most of the money? Were we necessary in that process? And the reality is we weren't. But we were very careful and signed we hoped, pretty bulletproof contracts with all these people that if they tried to go around us, we'd end up in court. So that's how you offer the virtual, and that was a form of a virtual network. And when you're small and starting out, that's how you have to do it. Now, if we were to grow, and we all moved on with life, and we were selling baseball caps, fancy, ones that, I won't get into the details, that lit up. That's not what we wanted to do with our lives. None of us did. So we just kind of let it go at one point. But if we wanted to expand and make more money, we would have needed to start doing all those things ourselves. We would have needed to start manufacturing ourselves. We would have needed to start marketing ourselves and selling ourselves. Then we get a lot more money. But in the beginning, having other people do everything was much easier. Network approach to departmentalization. So you have the company core or the hub, and then you may have all of these different this network of all these different divisions all over the world. Okay, structural advantages and disadvantages. So this goes through all of the different structures and the advantages and disadvantages of each. We've already kind of covered this. I'm not going to go through each level. This would be a great place for me to pull a quiz question or two. But once again, I would highly recommend reading through all of this. Task forces, teams, and project management. Now, this is something we see that you'll encounter in the workplace. First, I'm going to talk about a task force. This is a temporary team or committee formed to solve a specific short-term problem. I can't tell you how many task force I've been on in my life. It is, this is the easy way to remember what a task force is it's a force of people. There's a lot of definitions of the word force, but a group of people, and they have one task. So I remember years ago, I was on a task force to start a new swimming team at a school I was working for. So I was on the swim team task force, and it was a group of us that got together, and that's all we did was figure out a way to get a swim team on campus. And we did it. And once it was up and going, we were done. The task force dissolved. And so task force are very common because something comes up and you need to achieve one goal one time. And that's very effective. Cross-functional teams. So this is where you get a group of people from across an organization to come together to try and solve a problem. I remember a cross-functional team at one of the schools I worked for. We were having a lot of trouble tracking student enrollments. So how to when a student was, say, a traditional student and took an online class, that was through the online school, not the traditional school. How do the schools talk to each other? How do the online people make sure that the student is taking the correct course? What if the student signs up? Because if you let a student just sign up and take any course they want, that could be really problematic, because what if they don't need it to graduate? The student could get really upset. So we want to make sure that didn't happen. How are grades reported? How do the advisors get the grades? And how are the grades reported to the right place? Because our management system had different transcripting locations for both online and traditional students. So once we started to blur those lines, we found a lot of flaws. And then we had huge financial aid issues because federal financial aid relates to individual terms. And sometimes online education doesn't fit neatly within those terms. And I can go on and on. We figured out, and then there's the student life approach. I should say that this is an important piece too. Well, if a traditional student is taking all online classes, one, do we have a rule against that? And if you don't, at what point are they no longer eligible to be in the dorms? Do you have to take a certain number of traditional classes to be in the dorms, because maybe you don't want students who only have online classes in the dorms? Maybe you don't care, but you need to have the discussion. So what we did is put together a group of people from across the campus, all the people we even had athletics in there, because what are the eligibility issues and with the different start times of the online versus traditional classes? You don't want an athlete to be accidentally ineligible. So we got everybody together and had a group of meetings, a cross-functional team, and we solved the problem. It took about a month of working through all the issues, but it actually came out really well. And then a project manager is one person who coordinates the completion of a project. I have a lot of good friends who are project managers out in business right now, and so they have a specific task. I have a good friend who works in real estate, and he's a project manager. So he actually goes to vacant pieces of land or pieces of land that they may buy and then demolish whatever's on there, and identifies them for development. They do residential housing, and he figures out what would be involved with taking this piece of land, building houses on it, and selling the houses, and working with the city and the utilities and getting the whole thing going, start to finish. And then he proposes it to to the president of the company. If the president of the company green lights the project, he coordinates it, everything from the land surveys in the bulldozers the first day to the furnishings in the model home and getting the last home sold, and then even collecting certain kinds of taxes over the long term that will pay for the installation of utilities and so forth. It is a huge project. Sometimes, he does this in California, the cities will require that parks be included and shopping centers be included, new shopping centers whenever there is a new housing development put in. So in a sense, he's project managing the building of very small cities. It's a tremendous job, but he is the one point person for the whole thing. So he's project managing the whole thing. Now, he has a lot of very capable people under him, but he's very busy, as you can imagine. And by the way, he only does one at a time, and each project takes about 5 years. Okay, project manager relationships to departments. So if you look, say you have the president of the sailboat division, and then on the far right you have the project manager, and how that project manager will work with each of these other departments. Now let's look over at finance and the budget analyst and how he reports to the project manager. Well, that same guy may report to multiple project managers. That's pretty common. For example, in the sample I just gave you about my friend who basically coordinates the development of these small little residential cities, he has, within his company, they have an HR person, an HR department. Well, that HR department services all project managers. They also have certain construction crews that work exclusively for them. So those construction crews work for multiple project managers and just go from project to project to project. So that's where you actually, they don't have the design here in this slide or even in this PowerPoint, but you actually end up with a huge matrix of how you may have one foreman of a construction crew, say people who do carpeting. The carpeting department is going to report to maybe 5 or 10 project managers, and they're going to go and they may be carpeting 3 different developments at the same time as they're putting carpet in these homes. And so somebody's got to organize all that. And so you could see the value of having a matrix where you have that carpeting guy is going to have a bunch of bosses, and he just needs to send out his crews, know where to send his crews for carpet on each morning to know who's doing what. All right. And finally, structure follows strategy. So you want to figure out where you want to go and what you want to be as a company, and the structure needs to take you there, needs to facilitate that process. And this is why when you may have heard stories, I'll use Apple as an example. When Apple started, Steve Jobs ran the company. Steve Jobs was a brilliant marketing guy. He really had a good feel for what the customer wanted, but he had no idea how to structure a company. And so as Apple grew, they actually the board of directors asked Jobs to step aside as president and hire a professional president to run the company. John Scully, I believe, who had run Pepsi, came in to run Apple. And Jobs was the one who recruited his own replacement. Now, Jobs was still going to be, I believe, chairman of the board, or I'm going back a long time, actually, and he was still going to be involved with the development of products and everything, and still basically owned most of the company, a large portion of it. But he needed somebody who knew how to take the strategy and implement structure. And Jobs recruited Scully very heavily because he had a lot of success at Pepsi. And very famously, as Scully was resisting the move, said, well, do you want to make sugar water the rest of your life, or do you want to change the world? And that was Jobs' brilliance. He convinced Scully to come in and take over. Of course, Jobs was so volatile at the time that Scully ended up firing him not that long after he was hired, because Jobs was so disruptive and in a sense really hurting the company. And of course, Jobs came back years later and started the iPod and iPhone, and the rest was history. Okay. So that should do it for Chapter 10. I gave you a couple hints on quiz questions, and we'll see you back for Chapter 11.